Welcome to the Speckled Truth Podcast. This is the only show dedicated to the conservation of the trophy trout population from the East Coast to the Gulf Coast. Here, we go below the surface to discuss what happens when science and anglers work together for a cause. Gear up with your host, Captain Chris Bush, a trophy trout purist, leader and educator within the fishing community, as he talks about all things big speckled trout. Get ready for the slimy, salty truth, better known as the Speckled Truth.
Hey everyone, this is Captain Chris. I want to welcome you back to episode 10 of the Speckled Truth Podcast. Can't believe we're about halfway through the podcast season of season 1, which is crazy, and we've gotten just a tremendous amount of followership and notes and messages of just people and you guys enjoying the podcast. And so today, pretty special guest from the Alabama Gulf Coast, Captain Patric Garmeson. What's up, buddy?
What's up, Chris? Man, I'm super excited to be on this podcast. I listen to y'all every time one comes out, and man, it's a cool opportunity to be a part of it. So thanks for asking me.
Absolutely, brother. So we actually have a little bit of a relationship that goes obviously beyond this podcast. And 2 years ago, when we were at the Biloxi Boat Show, even before that, we were kind of in contact with each other. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was talking to Captain Patric Garmeson, and I read your article and didn't even kind of know it was in actually Saltwater Sportsman magazine. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yeah, the one that Bob McNally did.
That was a great article, man. And so after we kind of established that relationship, got to finally meet you at the Biloxi Boat Show and kind of established kind of a continued friendship throughout the course. And so I've seen you now at both of the boat shows and really just enjoy getting to know you, dude, as a father. But outside of that, honestly, as a big trout guy. So I don't want to kind of tell everybody about you, man. So if you can tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, man. Not born in Alabama. I was actually born in Pennsylvania, and then folks moved me down here when I was 5. And so, but this is home. This is where I grew up. My dad and mom had a fishing pole in my hand probably as early as 2 years old. And, man, I've just always enjoyed fishing and being a part of in the fishing community. And, man, I tell you, when I really got bit by the speckled trout bug was, as kids and young adults, we'd find a boat, we'd have a boat accessible, and we'd go out and chase the birds and just catch numbers of trout. And really, outside of targeting a trout under a flock of seagulls, I didn't really know how to target a speckled trout at all. So I got involved with the fishing club at Alabama Coastal Fishing Association and got into some of those tournaments. And man, people started pulling these. They were pulling 5, 6, 7 pound trout to the scales. And here, I've lived here my whole life. I'm joining the club around probably 25, 26 years old. And I had never even seen a speckled trout like in the 5 or 6 pound range. And it was like, holy crap. I had no idea Mobile Bay had this. So I'm like going to people like, just in general area, where did you catch a trout of this size? And they're like, oh yeah, we'll catch them in Dog River, out in the bay, Mobile River, whatever. And I'm like, oh my God, these are all areas that I've obviously frequent and never even knew they existed. So when I got to put my eyes on a big speckled trout for the first time, I was hooked, and I was like, all right, I want to figure out how to catch these big fish, and I want to do it quickly. And so anyway, that was really what got me into even, just to being excited about a big speckled trout. First time I got to see one. And my actual first experience of catching one was my buddy Adam Barker and I. We were actually fishing some live shrimp free line over near the Mobile River, and I caught my first 5 pounder. And man, the thing jumped and tail walked and all kind of crazy stuff. Like I'd never seen any speckled trout tube before.
Yeah.
And we get my Adam nets the fish, and I had a digital scale handy, and we had a tape measure handy, and I measured it. It was a full 25 inches, weighed 5 pounds exactly on the digital scale.
Yeah.
We took some good pictures, and man, the next thing I could think of was just how fast I could get the thing back in the water and released, and just to complete the whole process. And we dropped it in the water, gave it a little tail wag, and it splashed water in my face, and I couldn't have been any more excited about a dang fish in all my life right there.
Yeah.
So,
And dude, isn't it funny, man, how they kind of do that? I don't know, here in Texas, it seems like the super salty water, they're like, you know what? We're going to throw the super salty water right in your eyeballs as a way to say you're a jerk, but thanks again for letting me live.
yeah,
So it's
right.
kind of like a rite of passage, more or less. But it is funny how they tend to do that. But that's cool, man. That's a good story. So about how long ago was that, though?
Well, probably 14, 15 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And
Okay.
man, so then immediately after that, after catching that first fish, it was like, oh my God, all I could think about was how to catch more big speckled trout and bigger speckled trout. And a lot of what we did, kind of getting through that, because I learned a lot fishing with my buddy Adam Barker and Jim Foster, and we spent a lot of time live bait fishing and stuff. But we did really notice that a lot of bigger fish, we were able to catch them, or at least get them to show themselves on top water. So then we started getting more into the top water world, and then just and then it just goes from there into all the different hard baits and soft baits that you could think of to throw at them. But that's how I really got into getting and being able to hook and catch one. Was it did start with live bait, and then we started moving into artificial bait, and we do a little bit of all of it now. But man, there is something special about feeling that big fish just thump a soft plastic or a hard bait under the surface, or blowing up on one on top water. I mean, the biggest one I've caught to date is an 805, and caught it down in a little lagoon in Gulf Shores, and it took I was working a 7M mirror lure, the ones that the 3-hook mirror lures that
right underneath the surface
that float. Well, I was working it like pretty quickly, and felt like I wanted to have that action to where it stayed under the water. And for a brief moment, I let it float to the surface, and that's when she ate it. And and this fish came and took the lure off the surface, like with precision, so much precision that it barely made a swirl. Everybody's like, "Oh my God, I bet that thing just blew up like a hand grenade going off or something." I'm like, no, actually this fish was like really intentional about sucking this bait off the top and just moving on about her business. And luckily I got the hooks in it and got it to the boat. But that was a real special moment there.
And it's crazy, man, how they do that. It's like a subtle kinetic is kind of the way I see it. So like, if you're throwing like TNT in a water, it's just this huge explosion, right? And it's all of a sudden it's like throwing an M80, and all of a sudden it's just like this lighter explosion. Doesn't necessarily create a whole lot of it, on the water kind of commotion, but there's intent, and there's, like you're saying, precision intent of like, you know what, I'm gonna eat this and I'm not gonna miss it. In the crosshairs, fire, go. And so that's a cool. And dude, 7Ms, again, I've reiterated in a couple of articles with Doc J Wright, even talking with Doc J on the podcast, and that's one of his favorite top water plugs is actually a 7M. I caught actually quite a few fish this year, early fall, on a 7M. Dude, that thing, it's an old lure, quote unquote old lure.
Yeah.
But it gets it done, son. Just that twitch. And you can kind of keep that cadence like you're talking about, keep it just below the surface, 6 to 8 inches. And when it floats back up, I mean, they rip it. Whoa. And it's one of the more fun baits, especially as like a rip bait kind of / top water. So that's cool, man. That's a great experience. But I wanted to ask you, so you saw a big fish, you got involved into a fishing club. You then caught a big fish. Before you caught that big fish, though, you said you kind of wanted to learn more about it. And so these were areas you were fishing, you were seeing these big fish come out of.
Hmm.
From the time you saw those big fish and from the time you actually caught one, was there intent like of you going to pursue it? Like, did you change your approach and
Oh yeah,
mentality and everything?
without
Yeah,
a
you know what I'm
doubt.
saying?
Yeah, I mean the whole from the bait choice. Like I said, we did a lot of it with live bait, and it went from, you know, we would just kind of cast net whatever we could catch, or we'd just take whatever shrimp at the bait shop we could get, and then we realized that if we were going to fish with live bait or live shrimp, that
Hmm.
we needed big live shrimp. We wanted to find things. And then when you got into fishing with live pogies or live croakers or anything like that, you wanted to get the baits that excluded the smaller fish to your best of your ability.
Hmm.
And it just was so counterintuitive to traditional fishing of putting a bait of a design, of something, something that a say a 15-inch fish
Trap. Hmm.
bigger, any, a redfish, a flounder, whatever,
Yeah.
anything of that size, say 12, 15 inches, if it could consume it, that was really what we aimed to put on our hook for bait. And
Hmm.
the initial thing was like, all right, well, we gotta get up the game and what bait choice we're using, and exclude some of those bites. And as soon as you figure out that, you're like, all right, in order for me to catch more fish or more big fish, is I have to figure out ways to exclude those smaller bites and keep my
That's it.
line in the water better.
And that's interesting. I mean, but were you still fishing those like same spots that you were
Some,
catching like
yeah,
smaller fish?
some of them we were fishing the exact same areas, and then others we were just variations in our setup,
Hmm.
where we may have been pushing the boat up into, say, a shallow, um, kind of an area where you might get hung up a lot. We would actually position the boat over top of it and fish out towards deeper water prior. And
Hmm.
here to come to find out, the boat was sitting on top of where the bigger fish were actually feeding. So where we would get disgusted with casting towards shore and getting hung up, we were doing it all wrong. We may have been still catching fish, but we were catching the smaller fish on the edges of the school, or
Hmm.
maybe not even speckled trout. We may have been throwing out and catching white trout or ground mullet or something else that
Hmm.
was neighboring those fish. So it was there were a lot of enlightened moments that started to that started to come around whenever we started digging in deeper into how to catch these big speckled trout. And
Hmm.
it really was a big mission of mine for several years. And not to say I have it perfected by any means, but I feel like at least now, even if I go into new waters, I at least have a better idea of at least how to start looking for a bigger fish.
Yeah. So walk me through that process for you, because I mean, I've fished a number of different estuaries to include Alabama, but for you specifically in Alabama, because I'm interested to kind of see your thought process, and maybe for our listeners from North Carolina, Virginia, even here in Texas or Florida, if that's something that may transcend for them, in terms of like their approach, and that would maybe give some confidence, right? And that's part
Yeah.
of big fish fishing, is having confidence in your approach and abilities. So walk me through in terms of kind of like what your approach would be to a kind of a newer area, or if you're looking for a big fish.
Well, the visual clues first. I'm
Hmm.
like into finding areas that are going to have decently clean water. I actually try to avoid those areas that are super clean. We don't see a lot of that in,
Hmm.
in Alabama, but occasionally we do get some super clean water, and it things I actually like to try to avoid that and try to find somewhere where there's a little bit of a mix of that brackish and salt water, or maybe
Hmm.
even just fresh and brackish water mix, depending on the time of the year. Um, uh, structure ex- Structure is especially important in the warmer months. It doesn't seem to be Structure doesn't seem to be near as important in the cooler and colder months. it seems like there's a lot of times where it's really about um, finding the bulk of the fish, but
Hmm.
then just keeping your bait size larger, um, and fishing. And actually, a lot of times I find that a lot of our bigger fish are going to be uh, more aggressive on top of the schools. So like that
Hmm.
7M that's barely working under the surface, or like that like Joey Landreneau's slick lure,
Yeah.
utilizing that bait, and doing a slow wind retrieve over top of the school, and that bigger fish finding the ambush to be able
Hmm.
to come up through the maybe through the smaller school of fish, or a lot of times I see them mixed in with like large mullet and stuff. So those are some clues that I'm looking for. And then like I said, in those warmer months in the summer, finding you need to be in the saltier areas, because a lot of times, or most of the time, they're always going to be looking for that saltier water for where their eggs are going to have the
For
most chance
spawning.
of
Yep.
survival in the spawn. Um, and I feel like they utilize that structure to be able to protect those hatchlings and stuff. So they'll utilize that heavier, denser structure, like you'll find out in the middle of the bay in Mobile, where we have gas rigs and stuff. Around Dolphin Island, we've got a bunch of oyster beds and grass beds and stuff, and those areas tend to hold really big trout. And you're not gonna it just doesn't you don't find them as randomly out in open areas. It always
Yeah.
seems like they relate better to structure in those warmer months.
Okay. But in wintertime, I mean, you're fishing typically shore, not necessarily more so structure. You're looking maybe for some water clarity. Bait, obviously, I would imagine you're
Hmm.
probably always looking for.
Yep. And I
Yeah.
mean, like this past weekend, we had a tournament, and all of we caught some really really nice fish, and they were in the in a creek, or a shallow river,
Hmm.
um, that just kind of had a small subtle bowl to it. There was limited structure on the bottom, but the fish found that area to be a safe place, and I guess away from predators, and there was plenty of mullet in the area, so they really had no reason to leave. So they'll probably
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
there until the water starts to warm back up.
Now, y'all see a large influence, just like Louisiana, back home for me, especially when the rivers get high for y'all. So, explain kind of the Mobile Delta a little bit. I know a little bit about it. Y'all have a couple of rivers north of 10,
Hmm.
right, that are actually flooding the Delta. And
Yeah.
so you get a lot of freshwater influence into your estuary.
Oh, we have a tremendous amount of fresh water in our estuary. We have 43,000 square miles of watershed that dumps into Mobile Bay.
I didn't know it was
Um,
that much. Good
it's
Lord.
Yes, it goes all the way up to Rome, Georgia,
Hmm.
almost to Tunica, Mississippi, and it's a big funnel that comes all the way down. And pretty much everything south of the Tennessee River comes through and into Mobile Bay. So we're
Hmm.
constantly watching river stages, and we watch them year round, but it's especially important in the fall and winter months.
Hmm.
So like we're watching river stages at the Alabama River and the Tombigbee rivers, because those are the last two major rivers that are going to dump then into our five rivers: the Appalachie, Tensas, Blakely, Raft, and Spanish, and Mobile, and those areas that all end up down in right into Mobile Bay. Um, so when you're talking about a 43,000 square mile watershed, it really doesn't take a whole lot of rain once the grounds are saturated up there for pretty
Hmm.
much every bit of rain that lands on the ground and on people's roofs and highways, that it ends up in the creeks and rivers and ends up in our fishing, in our
Yeah, in your
habitat
backyard,
down
man.
here.
Yeah.
Um, so we certainly are constantly playing the watching the rivers and
Hmm.
watching the river stages, and then how is that going to affect water clarity and salinity and all of that.
Yeah.
So man,
And that's what.
there's a lot of times where we're fishing in areas that really if you were to taste the water in pretty much 95% of the areas that we fish, you'll tell us we're crazy because it is straight fresh water.
And that's it. That's interesting to me. And so I would liken that to fishing in Venice, Louisiana. Obviously, you have one of the largest rivers in the world, and that's watershed, and then it
Mm-hmm.
just dumps right there. But you're talking about one of the kind of more perpetual producers of big fish in the state of Louisiana. I would probably say Venice is probably your number one producer of trophy trout. Used to be, Pontchartrain would give it a run for its money, but lately it's been kind of Venice when the river gets a little lower. Now, when it's at flood stage, I would say it's probably a little bit more difficult, but when it comes down a little bit, you still have, I mean, just a ton of big fish. I say a ton, a lot of big fish being caught out of the Venice area. And that's just something that's really unique because I've kind of always had to play that card a little bit in terms of watching the river and how high it is and its effect and impact to a fishery and maybe how your approach is going to be in terms of your plan, fish in Port Sulphur Empire, because it's directly connected to that watershed. And so moving to Texas and into Florida, even Mississippi to some extent, because you can get away from it, even though there is watershed, it's probably not near the amount. Um, and so you don't really have so much of an impact there. And it's kind of nice because you can start to develop a little bit more consistency in terms of your pattern. Now, for you guys, y'all get a ton of rain up north.
Mm-hmm.
Man, you're having to completely abort some of the areas that you were fishing, or
Oh
you
yeah.
just approaching it wrong. Is that kind of wild in terms of that thought process?
No. Now that we're talking more about the Delta fishing, it's it the Delta and any of the Upper Bay. There's a lot of really really good fishing that can happen in those areas with good water quality, and that as soon as those rivers rise and we start getting that down in our
Hmm.
area, man, it can take a really good bite one day and completely shut it out for
Hmm.
potentially weeks. I mean, it could be 2 or 3 weeks where you don't get another bite in an area that you were just smashing the fish. One area in particular that really was a real productive area for me this year was over on the eastern shore around Daphne. It's not one of those areas because it's out in the bay. Most people, by the time they're getting into like November and December, they're thinking, all right, all the fish or the bulk of the fish are pushed into the river systems. That's where you got to go fishing. And we were catching them out there in 2 and 3 feet of water out in the main bay. And the fishing was really, really good. And then we got
Hmm.
a rise in the river. And I went from 2.5 foot of visibility to zero. I mean, like 1 inch of visibility,
Yeah.
and just completely just flushed out all the fish. Where they go, that's the next question is like, where did all those fish go that were up there? Because I mean, it was a huge slug of fresh water that came down um, and just completely wiped that area out. That's the $1 million question for us is like all of the guys around here, we all kind of keep tabs on where these fish are and we're on them.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we get a slug of fresh water. And then it's like, all right, well, you would think if they don't reappear in the same spot in a week or two, once the water improves, where did they go? And,
And so
that's some of the
but
stuff that we chase a lot around here.
but I think you're getting to that, and this is like the perfect segue to one of the topics I wanted to discuss with you, and I know you've been participating in it. And that's so CCA started a trout tagging program in the state of Alabama, and that's something you, as a charter captain and part of the guide fleet, are producing, and so or participating in. Excuse me.
Hmm.
And so, talk a little bit about the tagging program that you guys have in the state of Alabama, and in how you got involved, and in kind of what they're going to use some of that data for.
All right. So I think they started it's 2 or 3 years running now, and it's a collaboration of Dolphin Island Sea Lab and it's funded by the CCA of Alabama. and it's a angler tagging program. So any Alabama angler, if they just join the CCA, they can get a kit for where they can go out and tag their own fish. And right now that they're doing the angler tagging program is specifically for speckled trout and redfish. We have orange tags for redfish, green tags for speckled trout. We report them on a website, and then we hopefully we hear back from some fish. And I've had numerous fish recaptured and get some stats on them. And a lot of the fish that I have recaptured are redfish. They're a lot easier to tag throughout the summertime and throughout the year, where I just feel like if we get one on board, I can tag it and get it back in the water pretty quickly, and it be in a good, it's still in good shape when I let it go. So I tend to tag more redfish over the year, but we do a lot of trout tagging.
Have you had some trout recaptures?
I think I've had 2 trout recaptures just here recently, and both of them were, if I'm not mistaken, both of them were recaptured within several hundred yards of where I had originally tagged them. So,
what was the duration of time before tagging and recapture? Do you remember?
One of them I think was like 40 days, and one of them I think was like maybe 120 days.
Wow, that's actually pretty long.
And they pretty much stayed in the same area, but the areas where we tagged them were I think both of them were recaptured in Theodore Canal, which is a deep, it's a 40-foot deep channel off of the bay that will pretty much have the ability to keep salt water in it all year round, regardless of how bad the bay gets. It's just there's not enough fresh water to come down and dilute 40 feet worth of salt water. So there's always some level of salt water in that place. And,
that's interesting, though, that they've kind of stayed put, or at least found some like comfort. And I'm interested because the 120 days, before recapture is really interesting to me. My dad, as you know, 12,000 tags. I think he's at like 800, 900 recaptures. I think the longest one, dude, he's had like out before recapture has been like 220 days. And that was like one. The majority of the recaptures that took place were honestly within like the first month and a half to like plus 3 months. So we're talking 90 days, maybe 120 days at max.
Right.
So 120 days is actually a pretty long time.
Yeah. And man, I'll tell you, one of the cooler stories that I've heard just out of our area is my buddy Jay O'Brien tagged a fish. He tagged a 5-pound trout on the Gulf Beach out front of Fort Morgan. It was like, I'm going to throw a date out there. Just say it was in June, and he got recapture data on it, like right at a year from the date in the same location, and it increased its weight by 1 pound.
No kidding.
Yep. So that's one of the cooler trout stories that I've heard on a tag and recapture.
Yeah. So you're talking about a pound a year. I don't know if you listened to the thing I did with Doc Weiss, the podcast there, where they actually cut out the otoliths and aged them, and they saw like the 3% of the trout that they actually harvested, grew up to 25 inches in like 3 years, right? And so, we always think of these big 30-inch fish as being genetic freaks. Well, that kind of shows that even just in that simple recapture, that's probably not one of those. Having said that, it does show that if you release a fish, the survivability is probably pretty high, especially a fish of that size. And in a recapture, that puppy's still growing, man. She's healthy. She's growing. She's growing at a normal rate. And she's basically contributing to the estuary,
Yeah.
And that to me, that's, I think, the tremendous value of like these tagging programs, or like getting the data. And I know I've asked my pops this. I haven't really necessarily got an answer. And that was like, okay, you've tagged all these fish, you got all these recaptures, but I know you're not the only dude tagging. But what is like Department of Wildlife and Fisheries or like what is CCA now that it's CC, like what are they going to do with it? Because just looking at his own recapture, kind of like what you're talking about, hey, we're probably seeing some sort of like environmental condition or area where these fish are going to stage. In my dad's case, he's recaptured 4 of his own fish within the exact same month in the exact same spot. And
Mhm.
so that shows that, dude, as long as bait's there, the ideal living conditions in terms of salinity and water temper there, those fish aren't moving. And it grew an inch in 1 month.
Yep.
So it shows, dude, like just in a really small, tiny, tiny little data set, the value of like showing that, hey, there's this fishery, this estuary or part of the estuary is pretty healthy. And it's contributing to the overall, you would think contributing to the overall stock assessment. And so I don't know if like Alabama or would you said the Alabama Gulf Coast or
Well,
Research Lab?
we have Dolphin Island Sea Lab and then the CCA of Alabama are the
It,
two partners in this. And
did they?
I did get a
I was
little bit
the
of info from them if you want to hear it.
Yeah, hell yeah,
All
because
right.
I want to know what they're gonna use it for.
So,
Sorry.
so what they're gonna do is they're working on writing up the first couple of years of redfish tagging data. So we started the redfish before the trout, and then they're hoping to have that published this year. So they're gonna have several years of, and then they're gonna have something published on that.
Well, we don't care about no
So,
redfish, man.
well,
Come
you
on.
got to start somewhere. Like I said, Chris, you gotta, you gotta practice on the dumb fish that you can beat up and throw them back real easy. So,
I'm joking, man. You know my
um,
disdain for those things. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry, bro.
I know it. So anyway, they're planning on having a meeting soon to announce the top taggers and for this year or for this past year. And the funding
Hmm.
is going to help with the graduate student program, and
Okay.
That's what they're hoping is really going to be the facilitator of the data, and the use of the data is creating and promoting a graduate student program for them to then pick out different segments of the data to be able to analyze and write
Heck
some
yeah.
papers on and come up with some some thesis on the what data they're seeing, and then hopefully be able to start monitoring mortality rates and health of the overall inshore of the redfish and speckled trout for our area.
And dude,
um
that's
it,
so badass, dude. That like you're actually getting some younger guys right involved into doing some research, like
mhm.
actual biologists taking a look at the data. The data is there, man. Like,
Yeah.
and then just simply like doing the nug work and then analyzing it. Look, I'm stupid. I'm not gonna lie. And so like my very, very tiny little brain only has like can compartmentalize a few things, especially as it's fishing related. But having those guys who are much bigger brain, more analytical, taking a look at it and then maybe seeing a much larger scheme or maybe some tighter trends in terms of those data or data analytics. That's going to be super cool. And so when are they going to publish that or
that
start to research it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, right now we'll have the redfish. It looks like one of the students has already done is working on completing the redfish portion,
Hmm.
and then we'll start seeing some other stuff. It may take another 2 years before we really start seeing anything, just to get enough data to really,
Yeah.
where they can start drawing some conclusions or drawing, some similarities or whatever they want to try to pull together and create a paper on. But um, they also really they have two big threats to this program. One is we need the anglers to participate and tag. There's a lot of people that they kind of get excited about the idea of like, oh yeah, I want to be a part of the tagging program. Well, the thing is they can have their tags in their boat, but they got to use them and they got to report that data. So if we have the anglers out there doing their portion,
Hmm.
then we've got that part covered. Then the other part we need is there in the marine biology portion of of the Dolphin Island Sea Lab and South Alabama, they're going to have to continue to keep somebody interested in wanting to follow that graduate program. And as long as we have those two things, and we've got some funding from CCA and and I talked to Blakely Ellis today about it, and he's like, man, there's no way we're backing off of this thing as long as we have anglers involved and they're wanting to do it. We're not taking our foot off the gas on this project at all. So that was very encouraging.
Hell yeah, and that's badass, dude, because it can be lost, especially especially in the anglers. I mean, I've seen my pops and his kind of operation in terms of his tagging process, and it is time consuming. Like, oh, I'm gonna go pop a few tags. I mean, the fact that he's dedicated a lot of time, because it's very time consuming to catch a fish, especially when you're on a hot bite. Dude, you do not want to put your rod down and stick a pin in a fish and then release it when you could basically throw them right back and then maybe catch another one,
Yep.
So one, it's kind of a little bit of self-discipline, or in the instance of my pops, man, he actually had a really, really good system. And so it, just to share that a little bit, is like,
Yeah, I'd love to hear what he did.
yeah. So in his yellowfin, which is obviously one of the key components, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, because you can create your own live well system. And so I've known folks that have created a big live well out of a 120 quart igloo, and basically run like an aerator pickup, like an actual aerator that you would, not an aerator, a bilge pump, excuse me. And so as long as you have a pump that runs to a separate battery, or you can run it to your like trolling motor batteries, what you'll do is you just have this spray bar that comes down, and you're creating basically an oxygenated live well system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of the dudes that fish like redfish and redfish tournaments. They would do that. Now in his boat, in the yellowfin, it kind of had that kind of built in. And the same with his Maverick. His Maverick's got kind of something similar, but those are really, really good live well systems. But you can create your own. So what he would do is he'd get on a pretty solid bite. And what he would do is, when he catch the fish, he would immediately take it off, throw it in a live well, and then he would catch, like, if he was on a hot bite, he'd catch 10 fish, because it was allowing him to kind of keep track of his kind of the amount of tags that he had. So he'd catch 10 fish, he'd have them in there, they'd be kicking around and all lively and everything else. And then he would pull out, he had a little bitty like Plano box, he would pull that out, and he had like his little dart tag, his tagging applicator. And then what he would do is like a little notepad, and he'd have that, before he would actually leave to go fishing, he would write down all the tag numbers. So let's say he was like 001. He'd have 001 all the way to, like, let's say 0100,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in that way, he didn't have to input all that stuff. Instead, he put 001. He'd pop that tag. That fish was, let's say, 16 inches. He'd write 16 inches, throw it back. And then he would, after he was done his day, he knew, based off of kind of where he fished, he would then fill out the actual cards and then put all the stuff online. And so it was honestly a lot more prep work, and then having a self-discipline to like catch 10 fish, pop them, release them, and then get back on them. And so that's how he was able to kind of, instead of doing one by one. Now, another thing is, he would obviously manage the actual life of the actual fish. So if the fish is in that live well just kicking around, doing really good, or if some was like, kind of hooked a little bit deeper and it was kind of having some trouble, kind of maybe going belly up or on the side or a little bit, not looking great, he would harvest that fish.
Yeah.
He wanted to give every possibility of that fish living a chance after he popped that tag, and so that was just a little bit of his process. But a lot of people think of, oh, I'm going to go tag fish, and then as that fish comes over the side of the gunnels, popping that tag and then releasing it. Now, if you're in a kayak, that's a totally different situation. You'd probably have to do it one by one. But if you're in a boat, either consider a live well or a ice chest live well. It doesn't have to be 120 quart, but you can probably get like a 50 quart. And then you just basically use a bucket, get the bucket or the water out of the bay, and then just pour it in there. And then once you do that, you can hit the recirc, and you got your spray bar, and you're adding oxygenation, and it's the water right from where you're catching them, and so it's really given a good opportunity for those fish to live, and you can kind of manage that process. So that's just his. But anyway,
Yeah.
but that goes back to one of the things you were alluding to earlier when you were telling me your first big fish story, and that is you release that fish.
Mm.
And for me, that's something that I've tried to incorporate a little bit more and be more mindful of this year is like the actual care of the fish after you catch it. And so I have never used a landing net ever. And so this year I've actually used the landing net. And the reason for that is after talking with like folks from CCA or some, friends at the Gulf Coast Research Lab, dude, anytime you can limit your interaction with the fish with your hands or not put undue stress by using a boga and holding them straight up and down, if you can support and cradle the entire length of the fish, that helps with survivability. So is that something you've kind of done or developed or incorporated or have seen that helps or what?
Yeah, definitely. I I would say without a doubt, if your fish is if the one thing that I get a little bit nervous about is if I've got a fish hooked with treble hooks, if it's
Mm-hmm.
say a top water bait that's it's hanging out of the side of its mouth or something like that, kind of on its side of its face, and you go and you net that fish. What is the first thing that fish does when it's in the net? It freaking
It's rolling,
rolls.
baby.
It rolls like a dang alligator, and it'll roll that whole thing up, net, hooks, everything. And now you're in a bad situation. Now
Right.
I feel like the fish's life is threatened at having a good survive, or having a good
Yeah.
release. So I kind of err on the side of if I see the fish coming in and it's treble hooks and I know that I'm strictly going to catch this fish to take a picture and let it go, or take a picture, put a tag in it, let it go, whatever. um, I would prefer to try to land that fish, just take my time, get the fish up alongside the boat, and stick the boga grip or a fish grip
Mm-hmm.
or something like that on its lip, and then bring the fish in, dehook it, take your pictures, measure it, whatever you want to do, and then
Mm-hmm.
let it back in. But yeah, I mean, if you can have your hands a little bit wet when the first time you touch the fish, it's good. Um, you and I talked off the air. I think I almost feel like guys that are waiting have a little bit of an advantage over a guy in a boat on having a good, successful release, because 9 times out of 10 their hands are going to be a little bit wet. The fish, they're going to be able to bring the fish up to alongside them, and a lot of times be able to just grab that thing with the a
Mm-hmm.
boga grip or a fish
Mm-hmm.
grip. And then the fish is, then it's done. You can keep the fish in the water the whole time you're unhooking the fish. So yeah, I mean, I think about those sort of things. But in the boat, if you're not using treble hook baits, if you're using soft plastics or just single hook baits or whatever, I think using a landing net is the right call, because you can you can hold the fish in there pretty good and get it,
Mm-hmm.
take care of it. And really, I mean, heck, I was just at the hatchery the other day where there are in full, they're taking care of fish. You know how they get fish out of one tank to another? With a freaking net, so nets,
Yeah.
we kind of get kind of anti-net at some point, but they're down there trying to keep all these fish alive, and if they have to do anything with a fish, they have to net it. So
They transport it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be
And that's
overly worried about nets, other than that potential of them rolling up with treble hooks, and then you got a whole different situation on your hands.
And dude, that's a nightmare. That's kind of one thing. And I actually bought I think a pretty decent quality net, rubberized, try to go spend a little bit more in kind of a net. It floats obviously, but I don't want treble hooks getting caught in nylon or things like that, dude, because
It's a
I try to
nightmare.
be efficient. And not only that, dude, I mean, you know this probably as well as anybody. Those fish, it's kind of like once they actually see a net, they go bonkers. And
Mhm.
then so what happens is the like you're talking about, where that back treble is caught in the side of a fish's face, and all of a sudden he beelines it to the net. That front treble gets snagged on the net, and then a fish shakes free. it's like, oh God, what a headache. But it's like, dude. So I mean,
The
but like what I
devastation.
found though is like, I would wear those fish out so I could grab them, right? Because I want to make sure I'm playing them out, and so I keep them there. I'm kind of going from left to right to try to get the perfect angle, so I can really use a lot of grip strength to push down on that fit right behind that fish's head and grab them kind of one fell swoop, come through the water, and then hold that fish up. Well, again, that's a lot of compression on the back, on the side,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of where I was getting. I was like, and not only that, I mean, from even times fishing stupid redfish tournaments, you would want to get them in as fast as you could, because that if you played them out too much, once you put them in the well, they're hard to actually kind of rejuvenate, and kind of get back. They've exhausted so much energy that if you can kind of fight them a little bit more, have that kind of fail safe. Now, if the fish is going crazy, obviously play it out a little bit more, but you you can kind of take more risk, if you will, netting a fish that has a little bit more energy versus just totally playing them out so you can just grab the fish. Anyway, and it just goes back to curling. But I didn't know. I'm not gonna lie, dude. Like, I didn't know y'all actually had a trout hatchery. Y'all have a trout hatchery in Bama?
We do. We haven't. They just started this program. Uh, so we have the Claude Petit Mariculture Center down in Gulf Shores,
Mm-hmm.
and the old facility many years ago they did raise trout for a little bit, and they've done redfish and they've done different things. And then the new center that we have now, there for a while they were raising pompano and
Mm-hmm.
redfish, and the redfish was highly successful. The pompano, they had a little ups and downs, but now the pompano is kicking butt. Um, so now they recently added southern flounder, because our southern flounder population has been down for the last several years, and they just, I mean, like within the last 3 days, they just had their first hatching of flounder, of the flounder eggs. Me and my son went down there, and they have several tanks, and they said they have estimated around 70,000 baby flounder in the tank. And you look down in there, and it looks like little bitty mosquito larvae right now.
Oh, that's
And
cool, man.
so yeah, they're super excited about that. Um, and then 70,000 may turn into 700 release flounder by the time it's all said and done. We don't know
Mm-hmm.
how what the success rate will be on the first go, but fingers crossed that we maybe see 7,000 or more fish come out of
Mm-hmm.
it. Then they all right. So I went down the wormhole there, but anyway,
Yeah.
because
No, I mean,
I'm pretty excited
but
about
speckled.
the flounder. And then the speckled trout, they are replacing the redfish. So they booted all the
Okay,
redfish out, and now they're going all in on speckled trout. And I went down there and
interesting.
saw that brood stock, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to help contribute to a lot of that brood stock through they're taking some of the marine biologists down there with me, and we went into Dog River and caught a bunch of fish out of Dog River one day, and they put them in there in the brood stock. And then we just had my fishing tournament, the Winter Classic, and
Yeah.
we had 16 teams, 2-day event. We were able to collect. I think by the time they got collected and taken to the hatchery, I think we ended up with like 55 or 60 speckled trout that are hanging out ready to be brood stock. And man, it's a really really exciting to be involved in that and watching that
Yeah.
process. And they hope to start having little speckled trout babies sometime later this spring. So
And that's awesome, dude, because I knew the Gulf Coast Research Lab right there in Pascagoula, Ocean Springs area obviously had their hatchery,
mhm.
because we work with them, especially with the boat show and stuff like that. And, understanding that process. Now, I think it was lost on a lot of people that, dude, like, you could actually contribute. Like, if you wanted to, they would tell you it has to be caught in like a certain area, um, just from a genetic, I guess, deal. And then, but anybody could go out there and actually catch a fish, and then obviously keep it as long as it's in pretty good health and condition, actually donate it to the Gulf Coast Research Lab, and they would take it, put it in a decontamination tank, and then ultimately introduce it into the actual hatchery itself. And so they were having a really big, they didn't have enough males as part of the hatchery. And so I think they said like every male they had service like every 8 females or something like that. It was way off track. And so I asked them, I'm like, what's the ideal ratio? You know, like honestly, the ideal ratio would be 1-to-1.
Oh,
Now,
really?
yeah, so
Well,
that's really cool.
and not only
Yeah,
that,
so
the male trout, they said that they only get about 3 years of service out of them.
I
Whereas
didn't know that.
a female, they could, a female could provide them good, healthy eggs up until the fish is 7 or 8 years old.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. That's pretty awesome. But I mean, is it the same situation though, where like general public, average angler who's maybe wanting to make a difference, or hey man, I got enough fish in a freezer. Let's actually go and contribute to the actual health of the fishery. Let's go and catch some fish to donate to, the lab or the hatchery. They could do that,
Yeah,
or
definitely. And it's a little
who would?
it's a little bit of a process of
Uh-huh.
making sure that, do you have enough fish that will justify sending a biologist down to where you are, or
Mm-hmm.
you making the trip to the hatchery, and so I mean there's some variables there, but like in the case where I took the biologist with me, I mean we had the truck. They brought the truck with the aerated tanks to the boat ramp, and we left,
Mm-hmm.
went, caught fish, put them in my live well, and we had the ability to be able to keep any size fish. So whether it was 12
Gotcha.
inches long or 20 inches long, we were keeping every one of them, and trying to just maximize how many fish we could get in there as quickly as we
That's
could.
cool.
And
That
so the blue
it,
wave did a good job at keeping all of those fish alive. I mean, 19 speckled trout at one time is pretty solid for 2 tanks. We had 2 live wells on the boat.
yeah, heck yeah. Now, is this in response to or a result of kind of the limit changes that you guys have experienced, or is this like an effort to help
That's
with that?
yeah,
So,
that's a good question, Chris, because that is that the limit changes and the whole public discussion of that led up to the limit changes really made them think that, hey, you know what, redfish have been really easy for us to do. The stock assessment says that redfish is in good shape, so let's utilize those redfish resources and the redfish areas towards speckled trout. That is now, it's now on the front of everybody's mind of like, hey, you know what, we have seen a decline in population. Stock assessments agree that population is down. So let's give the redfish the boot for a while and focus on speckled trout.
no, I got you. Now, to me, in following this via social media, obviously through you guys, Rich Rutland, some other folks, Joey Gates, those folks
Mm-hmm.
that I know that live on the Alabama coast and fish that fishery. A lot of our followers, man. It seemed like it was I think unlike most other states, it seemed like it was a pretty consensus notion in terms of like support as well. So like, in other words, like speckled trout assessment said that speckled trout are in the overall population are down, and recreational guys and the charter fleet were like, hey, we need to do something about it. And we're open to the notion of reducing limit or putting in a slot, I think is what you guys have now, right? Is it a slot?
We do have a slot, and that is, I mean, really, that came from the general public.
Okay. So there's the general public wanting the demand for the slot.
Yeah, I mean, the
That's interesting.
people that were showing up for the meetings, that were voicing their opinion on the matter, were like, "Hey, you know what? We not only do we generally enjoy catching speckled trout, we really enjoy catching bigger ones, and so why not protect the larger fish?" And so the general public actually was the driver behind that slot limit, and the reduction in the creel. And I mean, I have customers that have they have been with me many years, where we could catch our 10 per person speckled trout, and they have now seen the 6 per person speckled trout, and they're telling me, Patrick, we should have been keeping 5 or 6 speckled trout all along anyway. This is not, looking back on it, why were we keeping that many fish? And I've been really impressed with their acceptance of it. I mean, because they're paying me to come down here and harvest some fish and catch some fish, but at the end of the day, most of my customers are more appreciative of the fishery, and want to see that they can keep coming down here for the next 10, 15, 20 years and enjoy being able to keep catching fish. And if there's an issue with it, let's not keep beating it up, and in 10 years we're talking about, hey, where'd all the trout go?
I don't even know what to say other than the fact that Alabama right now is like the benchmark for angling and biology, stewardship of a resource, and being on the same page. You look 2 states to your west, in my home state of Louisiana, and I mean, dude, it might be a freaking civil war before it's all said and done if they reduce the overall creel limit from 25 to whatever it is, and then go up from 12 to whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much general angler disdain for, oh, there's no problem, there's no, and it's not to say that there's less. I've always been on this side of the house, man. I'm not saying that there's less fish. I do think there are less fish, but it's not a result of over harvest. I think it's generally less fish because, dude, we don't have any friggin' land left over there. You know what I'm saying? Like, the coastal erosion is ridiculous. And so as a result, that biomass just isn't replenishing. And obviously, if you have more anglers on the water taking more of that resource, and there's just not enough to kind of replenish that. Yeah, you haven't. But even then, though, dude, like 25, 12-inch trout per person per day, that's like reeling in a wet sock. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, a 12, like a 12-inch trout is like reeling in a wet sock.
It splashes on top for a little bit.
Right. So, dude, I mean, like a 15-inch trout, okay, you got to make a couple cranks. You might have to stop reeling a little bit and put a little pressure, and then, you can continue to fight that fish. And that's a nice fish.
It is.
Yeah.
I've been really pleased with the creels that when we do harvest fish, when I'm looking at the box, I'm like, you know what? That 6 fish limit doesn't look too bad when they're all 15 to 20 inches or whatever we're catching. And it's, just nudging that up from 14 to 15 inches has been pretty cool to see how that's happened.
Yeah, it's just cool to see, or enlightening to hear anglers, scientists all be on the same page for doing something good for their fishery and a resource, and not having a lot of blowback, and not having a lot of people that are. And so that's where I think you can start to really develop some change in a fishery, is when you have like groups that are using the resource. Because, dude, you're trying to make a living. They just want to go catch some trout. And so when you have these two kind of both on the same page, dude, that's only going to benefit the fishery in the long run. At least I would think. I guess time will tell with the overall creel reduction and the slot limit and stuff like that. So I'm interested to see how this transpires. But Texas just went 5 fish coast wide, from Upper Coast up there in the Galveston complex all the way up to Port Arthur, all the way down to Lower Laguna Madre. And so that, it kind of remains to be seen too, if that's going to have an impact. I'd like to take a small break to sincerely thank our podcast sponsors. As you know, we're a brand about sharing the passion and pursuit of trophy speckled trout, as well as our conservation. Fortunately for us, Mirror, Texas Custom Lures, and the original Custom Corky support that same passion, which is evident through the support of this podcast. Simply put, without these brands, none of this would be possible. And we're incredibly appreciative, and we hope you are too. Now, let's get back to the discussion. I really like talking about fishing, I do, man, but I love talking about our resource, because you go back to telling the story about your first 5-pound fish and or seeing your first big fish and how it made you feel. And
Mm-hmm.
dude, seeing a big fish, catching a big fish, targeting a big fish, and you finally do it. Oh my God, man. It like just lights this fire. And then the more you do it, it stokes the coal and fans the flame and just gets worse and worse. But the dude,
You're so right.
I know, I'm sorry. But like the trout hatchery here in Texas Parks and Wildlife, one of the things that's really cool, and I think knowing now that you guys have a trout hatchery, knowing you guys are taking the appropriate uh, uh, approach to managing your fishery collectively, here in Texas, dude, they introduced, and I haven't really shared this, but I went back and took a look. So I know through Doc Weiss's study and Gerald Horse and the one that he participated in when they cut out the otoliths that these fish typically get to 25 inches roughly between 4 and 6 years. Now you have those genetic freaks 2-3 years. Obviously those are there, but typically around that, let's say 4 to 6 year range. Texas Parks and Wildlife, I say one of the only, but really the only bay system that they've stocked consistently here on the Texas coast is East Matagorda Bay. Guess what? Last year, and I am saying there could be some notional relationship there, but we had twice as many trophy trout registered in the Trophy Trout Citation Program and Dirty 30 program than any of the other parts of the coast.
Oh,
And so
wow.
is that a direct influence in terms of, hey, Texas, and it wasn't a little amount. It was 6 million trout fingerlings. I have it. I have the article and everything else. And so you're talking about an introduction of 6 million trout fingerlings over the courses from 2013 to 17. And now it's 2019 and 20. So if you think about those fish that were released in 13, 14, if you go based off of Doc Weiss and Gerald Horse's study, those fish are now probably 27-ish inches, especially here in kind of a longer growing season here in the Texas coast because it's warmer. And you obviously have more ideal conditions with higher salinity and stuff like that. And so there's two things that I take away from that. One, dude, having a hatchery contributing to your fishery, there is direct correlation that you can actually grow a trophy trout fishery. Two, and this is on the angling side, is that if we have limits and we have the mindset to take care of a resource long term, are we going to sustain that, or are we just going to say, man, fishing is really good on these big fish, we're going to harvest the hell out of all these big trout, and now we start to see that decline because if they discontinue the hatchery program releasing into East Matagorda Bay, we've now maybe seen an artificial bump, and now it's kind of back to normal, and fishing, quote unquote, sucks again,
Yeah.
And so you can look at it from two different sides of the house, but I think the like artificial introduction of trout into a fishery, but proper management can sustain long term for a bigger trout fishery. And dude, that's why I'm passionate, because if that's the case, you have a big trout fishery for folks to experience a lot of like catching these big fish and really relish their splendor of like holding that fish and releasing that fish and it contributing back to the resource. And that's a good thing, dude. And I think Alabama is setting the benchmark in that. And so I just had like this aha moment. I can't shut up. Sorry.
No
Because I
worries,
love
Chris.
it, dude. I love
No
it so
worries. I
much,
do
man.
too. I appreciate your admiration for what Alabama's doing because I'm like uberly excited about it. That's why I've been trying to be involved as much as I can,
Yeah.
and like I said earlier, at the end of the day, I mean, I want not only do I do make my living on the water, and it's important that I have a healthy fishery for customers to come and enjoy, but it's just equally as valuable to me to know that my 7-year-old son in 30 years is able to enjoy a really healthy fishery that we can that we can all, that he and I will be able to enjoy as old man. And we're, we don't have to sit here and talk about, man, you know what? It really used to be good, but
Yep.
back when you were, back before you were born, man, you remember it, you don't know, but it was really good then. And I don't want to have those conversations. I want to have the conversations about how good it is now and how good it's getting. And we've seen that, I hate to go back to the redfish thing again, but we've actually seen that with the redfish through, through stricter limits and the hatchery and all that. Since I was a kid to where I am now, it is far easier to catch a redfish and more redfish. So I really see that there's a great potential to be able to have a better speckled trout fishery in years to come.
And dude, like I'm over here, like silently, I had to come on. I had to actually put myself on mute because like I'm like doing fist pumps and everything else because you said there's two things you said: a fishery getting better. And I heard on another podcast, it might have been Salt Strong or even Tom Rowland, I can't remember, but if you think about it, and it's kind of sad to think maybe in some of the states of fisheries, because I'm thinking back to Louisiana, man, the fishing was amazing. And I don't live there anymore, but again, my pops lives there. He fishes there. He's fished there for 60 years. And so, times when he was a boy to times now are completely different in terms of production. Now, not say the fishery's gotten worse, it's just declined a little bit, right? But why can't we, on the other side, make it go up? So the quote that I heard was, it's sad to kind of think that from a child's perspective or somebody just getting into the fisheries, that right when they start getting into fishing in their fishery is like, that's the best that they'll ever experience because it will continue to decline. Now, we want it to get better, right? Why can't we go back to the damn good old days, right? Where they're just smashing, a lot of fish, where you pull up to whatever point and catching them hand over fist. You hear this, but you kind of got to give a little bit to take to some extent. And so let's do that. Let's think about it from a long-term perspective as opposed to that short term. So I don't know, dude, like I love this stuff because it makes me happy to just see that people, anglers are taking, their own fishery kind of in their own hands, and everybody's on board with that, and a scientist. And so, hey man, let's make it change. So that's awesome, dude. Holy smokes,
And it's,
bro.
and it's really important it's extremely important, not a little bit important, but extremely important for the professionals, the guides, whether they're here in Mobile or they're in Tampa or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
If they focus on educating their customers on, harvest what you need, or what
Take what you need,
harvest enough, take what you need, release the rest.
Yep.
And enjoy the fishing experience. And more people, more guides sell trips on the experience and not on the actual harvest. I mean, because eventually, if you keep doing what you're doing, and we have diminishing water qualities, and we have other issues that are directly causing the problems, but we're trying to rebuild them on our, the best we can. If we're continuing to excessively harvest, it'll never be able to catch up.
Yeah.
So if we do some education on our end, I mean, I have 3 customers, anywhere from 1 to 3 customers on my boat, and we get to talk for 6 hours about fishing and about the environment and about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I choose to educate my guys and the ladies that are on my boat about, things have declined, but here's my goal. My goal is to do what I can to make it better. And, and I would encourage other professionals, fishing guides, while they're having their conversation with their customers, talk about that. And let's figure out how we can all work on it together and make it better.
All while experiencing the resource, targeting a big fish or whatever it is, and making it fun, right? I mean, dude, that's a good guide, and they'll rebook you because they've connected with you. And so So first off, checks in the mail, man, for mentioning all that, because it almost seems like kind of bribed you in that regard, dude, in terms of saying all that. But dude, you're spot on, man, because that's kind of something we've been preaching, that for a long time, dude, and that's
Mm-hmm.
just getting guides to kind of be more engaged in that regard, dude, and taking what you need and releasing the rest. So checks in the
Yep.
mail. I'll make it. Who do I make it out to?
Just
Patrick.
ugly fishing.
Yeah.
Let's pass all that through the business account.
Yeah, fair enough, man. Fair. I'll write a Speckled Truth check. All right. Nah, dude. So we're at an hour. But I don't want to kind of quit. I want to ask you a couple of questions, man. Kind of getting back to kind of some fishing just type stuff. But
All right.
yeah. So in the Mobile complex, what are some of the lures that you typically throw? And break it down maybe by like time of year and then approach to artificial, dude. Don't talk to us about no live bait, man.
I know. I'm such the redheaded stepchild
I'm
with
such a
this
snob, dude.
live
I'm
bait
sorry.
stuff.
I'll see you in
But
like 3 weeks, man. You can punch me in the face at the show.
hey,
No,
you're
go
not
for it.
you. All right, so I have for the longest time I've been an MR17
Mm,
mirror lure, black back, orange belly. If you saw me throwing much of anything else, it was probably because the water was really really muddy or something.
mm,
But so my hard baits are going to be the 7M mirror lure,
okay.
the 17 MR. I have friends that only throw the 27. I love the 17, and I don't even know that I own a 27. I just love the smaller profile bait. Um, I love the here in the recent years. I mentioned it earlier. Joey Landreneau's slick lure.
Yeah.
That thing that man that we really caught a lot of fish on that thing. That helped us in the tournament this past weekend.
Do you like a certain color in a slick lure?
Well, here's the crazy thing: is of all the fish that made up our creel over the 2 days, I think we caught them on 6 different colors.
Hmm.
So it was a pretty crazy range. But if you were just to say, all right, grab one slick lure and go, it's going to be cool beans. It's
Okay.
his cool beans color is very similar to that you would see other lure companies call open and night. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of that clear purple kind of color, and that thing is I have caught fish on it in probably 3 inches of visibility to 3 foot of visibility. It's
Do
a
you,
it's crazy how effective that lure is.
do you throw it on a weighted hook or an unweighted beast hook?
I end up using the weighted beast hook 9 times out of 10. But if I'm in a really really light wind situation, really calm conditions, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
fishing in water that's probably shallower than say 6 feet, I'll go with the unweighted. But
Okay.
there's so many times in the winter time when we're really fishing that slick lure a lot, that you just have so much wind, and or you might be in an area where you've got a little bit of current, and that weighted hook just does really well for me, and it allows me to cover the water column better. I mean, because there's sometimes where I'll jig that thing up and let it sink all the way to the bottom, and they whack it right when it hits the bottom. Sometimes
Interesting.
they hit it. Sometimes they hit it on the way up,
Mm-hmm.
or when it's coasting down. But there's a lot of times when they stone that thing right when it hits the bottom.
I got you.
So
Do you throw a
that
lot of
way,
soft plastics?
soft plastics. I really like Joey's the little slick.
Okay.
Putting that one on the jig head. I like any type of finesse type bait or fluke type bait.
Yeah.
Something that's just a
Straight
skinny
tail.
minnow type
Yeah.
bait. Yeah, something like that. And then, man, if none of that, if those are not working, or I'm just trying to figure out what they want for the day, I like to throw that matrix shad.
Mm-hmm.
And man, I tell you what, there's some homers around here. There's a lot there's a lot of matrix shad homers
Yeah.
that are like, man, the only bait you can catch trout on is matrix shad. They're fully bought in, and I remember the first time I heard all this talk about matrix shad. I'm like, man, it's just a paddle tail. just a paddle tail. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And Chaz and I were talking about this at the last boat show, and I was like, man, I picked up one of those jigs, and I had not been catching anything in this particular area, and I throw a damn matrix shad out there and catch a trout on like the first cast. I'm like, all right, well, maybe there's something to this. And I have seen some crazy results with that paddle tail jig. So
Yeah.
I will definitely incorporate that into the mix.
Gotcha.
And then but man, those, and then I tell you one other bait that I didn't mention is throwing a rattle trap.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
A floating or a regular?
No, half ounce
Okay.
gold side blackback rattle trap, and it's
Interesting.
throwing the rattle trap, and then the booyah have a, what is it called, a knocker or one knocker or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. But yeah, I mean, a nice lipless rattle bait, half ounce in size. Yo-yo that joker over some deeper water. This it's a really, really effective bait when you're around pogies. Like in the fall when the pogies are real thick in the rivers and the trout are just kind of suspended in those pogies.
Yeah.
Man, you throw a rattle trap through there and either burn it through there or yo-yo it through. We have caught some absolute hammer speckled trout near the like on the edges of the river channels and stuff in the fall. Probably one pretty cool story on that is my buddy and I, Jim Foster and I, we were fishing. We were pre-fishing. It was several days in advance of one of our artificial bait tournaments that we have in the winter, and we made a drift down a bank and throwing rattle traps, and we each catch like a 5 pound trout on our first drift. One of them's throwing the black and gold, and I think one of us is throwing silver and pink. So silver and pink is a good one too, but the black and gold is my go-to. And we like boom 2 5-pounders. We're like, wow, that was pretty solid. Let's make another drift. So we go back down, make another drift, and we catch 2 6s and a 4 on the next drift, and we're like, all right, that's 5 fish that would crush any tournament we ever fish. So let's leave these fish alone. And we like literally, we took pictures. We were like super excited, and we hauled butt and we left these fish. Well, and then the 43,000 mile watershed of Mobile Delta dumped a bunch of rain and water and totally ruined our spot. And we didn't catch another big fish there the rest of the fall. But it was hindsight. We should have sat there and just kept catching fish because they were some beasts there. It was an absolute blast. But anyway, went down another wormhole there. But
no, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. So,
but those are some of my go-to baits, and then one other that I really like is a little Yozuri El minnow.
okay.
So all the other baits we talked about are fairly large. The Miradine MR17 is small, but
yeah.
and then that El minnow is small, and man, that thing will catch some big fish too. It's a pretty nasty little lure.
Do you throw like any other lip jerk baits?
I'll throw a Rapala X Rap. And I like the 7s over the 10s, but the 10s are good too.
Okay.
I don't know why, but there's a lot of those baits, a lot of those hard baits. I tend to go on the smaller side, but then the soft plastics, I don't mind going a little bit bigger. Yep.
Interesting. Well, cool, buddy. Well, thanks for sharing that, bud. I appreciate it. Yeah, you typically use braid or mono? Or
yeah, I braid with a fluorocarbon leader. And then I really range my leader length based on what I'm throwing. If it's a bait that I'm probably not going to take off all day, then I'm fine with like probably an 18-inch leader. If it's on a soft plastic where I might be getting hung up and broke off, then I'll probably start with like a 3-foot leader, just something that every time it breaks off, I can tie another jig on there pretty quick. And then, but I didn't mention top water. Top water, I like my pink skitter walk and my pink one knocker, the Bone Spook Junior. those are three pretty solid topwater baits for me.
Yeah.
And I like to go with a shorter, probably like that, maybe even as short as like a 12-inch leader on that, and go with maybe like a 20 or 25-pound leader, something that's nice and stiff.
Pure
And
fluoro or what? Or you do mono?
go braid to fluorocarbon.
Okay.
I
No,
just keep it simple. Like
Yeah.
I keep my stuff to where if I need to interchange from one rod to the next, and I mean, I don't have to, I don't know. I'm not as much of a rod snob as some guys are. Like my buddy Richard Rutland. Richard has like 125 rods on his boat, one for each lure that he throws, like a bass guy.
Yeah.
And I'm not as snobby at it as he is. But Richard starts talking rods, my eyes kind of glaze over. But if he starts talking lures and trout, then I start listening. So it's
Oh,
pretty
it's
funny.
funny. Yeah, well, I used to fish redfish tournaments against him and his pops, man. Me and Brandon Treadaway, and Rich is a good guy. And it was cool to see him kind of, launch his charter business. I think he's working for Bobby Abiscato, right? Or he's
No,
still, or
no, no. He's got his own thing. His
yeah,
is cold. His is cold blooded.
cold blooded. Yeah, he
Yeah.
was though, right? I thought working for
Well,
Bobby A.
Bobby was his mentor, and him and
Mhm.
Bobby are really close. They actually fish a lot of tournaments together. They are definitely two peas in a pod. The two of those guys,
Yeah.
man, and they are some big trout slayers. They beat me this past weekend in the Winter Classic tournament. They snagged a freaking heavy bag,
Yeah.
or not really. Well, they had two heavy fish on Sunday, and anyway, they got us by like a pound and a half, 2 pounds, something like that. But Richard snagged a really nice trout, so it
Bobby A
was.
can fish, man.
Oh
Him
my
and
God, those
him,
two guys are as they're as good as it gets. I think those two together.
yeah, we lost so many tournaments to Bobby and Scott. Is it Scott Ritter, I think, and Bobby
Yeah.
Abiscato? Yep.
Yep.
Is Scott still there? I don't even know if he's.
Nah, Scott. I don't know. I haven't seen Scott around in a while.
Yeah.
Bobby told me that Scott gets into something, he gets all in. So if it's
Yeah.
like surfing in Costa Rica, he's going surfing in Costa Rica.
That's
If
cool.
it's going hunting whitetail in Saskatchewan, that's his thing for that. So he's
I got you.
he's an
That's
all
cool,
in
man.
kind of guy. Yeah.
We've gone down yet another wormhole. Of people we probably should have did that offline, dude. But I'm sorry, it's fun, man, to kind of catch up a little bit. But yeah, with regards to that, did you have like a mentor getting into the guide business or no?
Man, a little bit. I mean, Richard helped me a good bit. Richard and I actually got our captain license at the same time. We both got our license in 2010, and he was more aggressive and pursued the guide business pretty much right out of the gate. That same year that we got our license was the same year as the oil spill, and I really treaded on it lightly. Like I'm like, all right, well, is this oil spill gonna totally wreck our fishery and so on and so forth? And so I played it a lot more cautiously and ended up taking on a full-time job with a landscape company for a couple of years. And while I developed my brand and and just kind of built some some skills that I didn't have, like in the business side of things and sales and marketing. And I finally got to the point where, like, man, I gotta go fishing. And
Yeah, that's cool, man.
so I've been full time now for 3 years, going into my fourth season. And man, I couldn't be any more happy about my decision doing that. It's been an absolute blast
So how do
being a fishing guide and also being a steward of our environment. Just trying
yeah
to make awareness of what we've got going on.
yeah? So how do people get a hold of you, bud?
So they can they can text me or call me at 251-747-1554. I have a website at uglyfishing.com, UGLYFISHING.com. And then if you're on social media, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I do mostly Facebook and Instagram, but I do have Twitter. I have a TikTok. I have YouTube.
Dude.
So I try to be out there. I have LinkedIn. Whatever's happening on the social media world. I'm dabbling in all of it. So.
Simmer down now, man. No, the reason I asked you to do that is because last time I was on with Matt Chipperfield, and I don't do plugs very good, man. I mean, you know me as well as anybody. I don't really care for that side of the business, but I know you're running a business, and I appreciate your time, being on the podcast. And so if folks are interested, especially in the Alabama coast, I mean, it's not necessarily noted for its fishery like Texas, or Florida. But if people are interested and are down there vacationing Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, whatever, and they want to actually do book a trip, man, I just definitely want to push them your way, bud. So anyway,
well, I appreciate it, Chris. And and you're right. I mean, there's not a lot of info out there that says that, hey, Alabama's a great saltwater fishery. So we are kind of a forgotten little area here that people don't know about. So it is, I appreciate the opportunity to get on here and talk fishing with you and get. I just got all excited about speckled trout fishing, and I've been freaking speckled trout fishing all week, and I'm ready to go at it again right now.
That's it, man. That's it, baby. It's stoking the coals. That's what I do apparently pretty good. But I appreciate it, bud. And I'll see you in a couple weeks, man, at the Biloxi show, and we'll definitely catch up a little bit more there. And then honestly, we'll be at the Mobile show. So if you'll be there too, I'll see you a lot in the next 2 months, man.
All right. I will be at the Mobile show pretty much the whole time. The Biloxi show, I'll probably just drop in for a day.
Okay.
Looking forward to it, brother.
All right, big dog. Well, I appreciate you being on the show, bud. And for everyone else, hey, I really appreciate you sticking up. This is actually a little bit longer episode than what we've had in past, just because a lot of information I want to talk about. And I honestly run my mouth too much. And so I want to share that. And I don't know, man, I love the passion, especially for our big trout fishery. And when I think people are doing it right, just like talking about it. Anyway. Yeah. So if you're going to be on the Gulf Coast, so I said it last podcast, I'll say it again, the 7th, 8th, and 9th of February, we'll be there at the Mississippi Gulf Coast Coliseum at the Biloxi Boat Show. We love to see you there. So come on out. If you've listened to us at this point in the show, definitely come on out and see us. If not, we'll be at the Mobile Boat Show in March, which is the 6th through the 8th of March. And so come out to either one of those, come by, say hello. Honestly, man, just come chat it up with us, and we love talking trout fishing. So hope to see you guys there. But as every other time in the podcast, we always want to kind of leave you with always taking what you need, release the rest, tight lines. And until next time, guys, God bless. Take care. Bye now.